Maxwell Everett stared at the background check report on his desk, his jaw tightening as he read the details about Savannah Mitchell. Something wasn't adding up. "Mr. Everett, Ms. Mitchell has arrived," Mrs. Reynolds announced from the doorway of his Beacon Hill mansion office. "Send her in," Max replied without looking up, rearranging the financial spreadsheets that had been his only reliable companion since Elaine's death 3 years ago. The door opened again, and he finally lifted his gaze. The woman standing before him wasn't what he expected. Her simple navy dress was a stark contrast to the pearl-clutching nannies who'd cycled through his home. Her eyes met his directly, gray-blue and unsettlingly forthright. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Everett," she said, extending her hand. Max took it briefly. "Ms. Mitchell, this isn't a standard position. My children, Phoebe and Finn, have experienced significant trauma. We've had 4 nannies in the past 2 years. None lasted more than a few months. I understand perfectly, sir. I also know what it's like to lose everything and need to rebuild." Max frowned. That wasn't the rehearsed response he'd anticipated. Before he could question her, the sound of shattering glass followed by children's shouts echoed down the hallway. "They're already testing your limits," Max sighed, rising from his chair. "Let's see if you survive day 1, Ms. Mitchell." He led her down the marble hallway where they found the 5-year-old twins amidst shards of a priceless vase. Finn, with eyes identical to his father's, stood defiant. Phoebe, dark curls framing a face that mirrored her deceased mother, trembled with fear. To Max's surprise, Savannah knelt among the glass fragments, heedless of her new dress. "Hello, you must be Phoebe and Finn. I'm Savannah. You know, I once broke my foster mother's favorite piece. I was so scared I hid in the closet for hours." The twins stared at her suspiciously, but interest sparked in their eyes. "What happened?" Phoebe whispered, her voice barely audible. "She found me, of course. But instead of yelling, she showed me how to glue the broken pieces back together with liquid gold. In Japan, they call it kintsugi, the art of making broken things even more beautiful." Max watched, stunned, as Savannah transformed disaster into a lesson. For the first time in years, his children weren't screaming or running away. That evening, after putting the children to bed with an ease Max hadn't witnessed since Elaine was alive, Savannah found her employer in the library. "The reports say you withheld information in your application, Ms. Mitchell," Max said bluntly, pointing to the folder on his desk. "You didn't mention the financial scandal in Maine." Savannah paled but maintained her composure. "I wasn't charged with anything, Mr. Everett. I was a victim. Nevertheless, I expect complete transparency from anyone caring for my children. And I expect to be judged by my actions, not by someone else's mistakes," she replied with a frankness that caught him off guard. As she left, Max remained in the library, staring at Elaine's portrait above the fireplace. "What kind of game are you playing, sending someone like her to our home?" he muttered to the wife who would never answer. Upstairs, for the first time in months, the twins slept without nightmares. The next morning, Max observed from his study doorway as Savannah orchestrated breakfast. Finn was actually eating instead of pushing food around his plate. Phoebe had allowed her hair to be braided, something she'd fought against since Elaine's death. "Mrs. Reynolds tells me you have a degree in early childhood education," Max commented as Savannah passed him in the hallway later. "Yes, an experience with trauma-informed approaches. Your children are grieving, Mr. Everett. They don't need discipline as much as understanding. And you understand grief?" Her eyes met his, unwavering. "More intimately than I wish." In the weeks that followed, Max found himself increasingly distracted at board meetings, wondering what was happening at home. For 3 years, he'd functioned by compartmentalizing work during the day, perfunctory parenting in the evenings. Now there was Savannah, blurring the lines, making the mansion feel like a home again, with movie nights and science experiments in the kitchen. One night, returning late, he heard piano music from the music room. He found Savannah at the grand piano, playing Chopin with surprising skill. "I didn't know you played," he said. "Learned at the orphanage," she replied without missing a note. The headmistress believed music helped troubled children. "And were you troubled?" Her hands paused on the keys. "Let's just say I had difficulty accepting boundaries." Max's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Lawrence Sinclair, his brother-in-law and CFO. "We need to talk about Savannah Mitchell," Lawrence said without preamble. "There's more to her story than she's telling you." Max ended the call, looking up to find Savannah watching him, a shadow crossing her face as if she sensed the threat forming against her, a threat that would soon test the fragile trust beginning to form between them. A month passed since Savannah's arrival at the Everett mansion. What should have been a tense probationary period had transformed into a gradual but noticeable shift in the home's atmosphere. The twins, once rebellious and withdrawn, now anticipated each morning with enthusiasm. "What's on for today, Vanna?" Finn asked, using the nickname he'd created for his nanny while devouring his breakfast. Savannah smiled, adjusting the ribbon in Phoebe's hair. "I thought we'd visit the New England Aquarium. They have a new deep-sea creatures exhibit. Can Dad come too?" Phoebe asked, her large brown eyes hopeful. The unexpected question made Savannah hesitate. In 4 weeks, Max had maintained a calculated distance, interacting with his children only during dinner and on weekends, always in structured, predictable activities. "Your father is very busy with work, sweetheart," Savannah answered gently. "Indeed I am." Max's voice sounded from the kitchen doorway. He rarely joined them for breakfast, preferring to leave early for his office in Boston's financial district. "But I can reschedule some meetings." The surprised silence that followed was broken by the twins' shouts of joy. Savannah observed Max with curiosity. Something had changed. Perhaps it was the school reports mentioning the children's progress, or maybe it was the laughter that now echoed through the previously silent mansion corridors. At the aquarium, Savannah watched Max's awkward but sincere interaction with his children. Behind the ruthless executive facade was a father who simply didn't know how to connect with his own children after tragedy. "They adore you," Max commented as the twins ran ahead to see the penguins. "3 professional nannies with impeccable resumes failed where you, with your complicated past, succeeded." Savannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Perhaps because I understand what it's like to lose everything and feel that nobody really cares about how you feel." The vulnerability of her response caught Max off guard. That night, after putting the twins to bed, he invited Savannah for tea in the library. "How was it?" he asked, serving Earl Grey in Chinese porcelain cups. "Losing everything, as you said." Savannah hesitated, turning the cup between her hands. "Jason, my ex-fiancé, wasn't just a partner. He was my best friend since college. I trusted him completely. When he proposed opening a foundation for foster children, using my savings as initial investment, I didn't think twice. And he disappeared with the money. With the money, my reputation, and my ability to trust." She looked at Max. "And you? How was losing Elaine?" The direct question, something no one dared ask, should have irritated him. Instead, he found himself answering, "Like losing half of my soul. Not just my wife, but my partner in everything. The only person who saw the man behind the Everett empire." He paused. The twins were only 2. It's as if Elaine was torn from them before they could really know her. The conversation continued into the night, as the autumn storm that had been forming finally broke over Boston. When the mansion was suddenly plunged into darkness, they were still talking, illuminated only by the fireplace. "You should sleep here," Max offered, indicating the library sofa. "It's late, and the stairs could be dangerous in the dark." Savannah nodded, accepting the blanket he offered. For a moment, their fingers touched, and an unexpected electric current ran through both of them. Max pulled back as if burned. "Good night, Ms. Mitchell," he said formally, re-establishing the professional distance that had momentarily disappeared. "Savannah," she corrected gently. "I think, after tonight, you could call me Savannah." When Max closed the library door behind him, his heart was beating in a way he had forgotten was possible. In the room he'd left behind, Savannah looked at Elaine's portrait above the fireplace, feeling for the first time the weight of the deceased Mrs. Everett's constant presence. Across town, in his elegant apartment overlooking the Charles River, Lawrence Sinclair watched the storm while speaking on the phone. "I want everything about her. Every stolen cent, every lie told. Max may have been blinded, but I won't let some gold digger get near the Everett fortune." The next morning, Max found himself lingering at home longer than usual. Watching Savannah help the twins with a science project, growing crystals in the kitchen, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the desire to stay. "You're going to be late," Savannah said, noticing him checking his watch. "The CEO gets to decide what constitutes late," Max replied with the hint of a smile. Later that week, the first snow of the season blanketed Boston. Max returned from work to find his typically somber mansion transformed. Christmas decorations, boxed away since Elaine's death, adorned the main hall. The scent of gingerbread filled the air, and the sound of his children's laughter, bright, uninhibited, led him to the kitchen. Savannah stood at the counter, flour dusting her cheek, helping the twins decorate cookies. She looked up when he entered, her expression momentarily uncertain. The children asked about Christmas traditions, she explained quickly. I hope it's okay. Max surprised himself by saying, it's more than okay. That night, after the twins' excitement finally gave way to sleep, Max found Savannah in the family room, arranging presents under the newly decorated tree. Thank you, he said simply. She looked up, confusion crossing her face. For the decorations? It was the children's idea. For bringing life back into this house. For helping them remember joy is still possible. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Max took a step toward her, drawn by something stronger than reason. His phone rang, shattering the moment. Lawrence's name flashed on the screen. I have to take this, Max said reluctantly. As he stepped away to answer, he missed the shadow that crossed Savannah's face, an instinctive wariness at the mention of his brother-in-law's name. A wariness born from years of learning to read danger signals. And Lawrence Sinclair, though hidden behind wealth and family connections, radiated danger in ways that reminded her too much of men who'd hurt her in the past. Snow fell in heavy flakes over the Everett Mansion's garden, transforming the scene into a winter postcard. Inside, the approaching Christmas brought an atmosphere that hadn't existed there for years. Savannah helped the twins decorate a massive pine tree in the main hall, a tradition Max had abandoned after Elaine's death. Mom always put this angel on top, Finn commented, holding a delicate crystal piece. Dad said it was special. Savannah took the ornament carefully. Then we should honor that tradition, she replied with a smile. What's going on here? Max's voice echoed through the hall. He had returned early from the office and was watching the scene with an unreadable expression. Dad, Phoebe ran to him. We're making a real Christmas, like before. Max didn't immediately respond. His eyes were fixed on the crystal angel in Savannah's hands. Elaine's wedding gift, a Mackenzie family heirloom passed down for generations. I'm sorry, Savannah hurried to say. I didn't mean to overstep. The children mentioned traditions, and it's all right. Max interrupted, his voice softer than she expected. It's time to move forward. That night marked a change. During dinner, Max didn't check emails or make calls. Instead, he listened attentively as Finn described his science project and Phoebe detailed her ballet lesson. Savannah observed, capturing the moment in her memory, the snowflakes on the window, the fire crackling in the fireplace, the sound of laughter finally filling the house. Later, when the children were in bed, Max found Savannah in the music room, softly playing the piano. I didn't know you played, he commented, leaning against the doorframe. Savannah smiled without interrupting the melody. Chopin, learned at the orphanage. The director believed music helped troubled children. And were you troubled? Max approached, sitting beside her on the piano bench. Let's say I had difficulty accepting limits. Her fingers danced over the keys. Each foster family was a new disappointment. I learned early that counting on others was a risk not worth taking. Max watched her, fascinated by the contradiction she represented. So strong and resilient, yet capable of tenderness that had transformed his children. The kids adore you, he said simply. Children need stability and unconditional love. Something we both understand the value of, for different reasons. The comment hung between them, loaded with unspoken meanings. Max found himself leaning slightly toward her, as if drawn by an invisible force. Savannah stopped playing, her eyes meeting his. The moment was interrupted by the shrill ring of the phone. Max pulled back, the spell broken. The expression on his face when he answered made Savannah realize something was wrong. Lawrence, he said tensely. What's so urgent? As Max spoke on the phone, his expression transformed. When he hung up, he faced Savannah with cold, distant eyes. I need to go. Lawrence found inconsistencies in the Everett Foundation accounts. Did something happen? Nothing you should concern yourself with. Formality returned to his voice. Just take care of the children. When Max left, Savannah remained seated at the piano, a feeling of apprehension growing in her chest. For some reason, Lawrence Sinclair's name had bothered her since day one. There was something in Max's brother-in-law's gaze during family dinners, something calculating and cold that contrasted with the charming smile he displayed. The next morning, Max seemed distant again, avoiding being alone with Savannah. The following days solidified this pattern, leaving her confused about what had changed. What Savannah didn't know was that Lawrence had planted the first seeds of doubt, showing Max photographs of her with Jason, her ex-fiancé, at charity events where large sums had disappeared. It might be coincidence, Lawrence had said with fake concern. But with the value of the Everett Foundation and the access she has to your home, we'd better investigate thoroughly. Christmas Eve arrived with a blizzard that isolated the mansion from the outside world. The twins were ecstatic about the presents and the promise of a festive dinner. Savannah had prepared everything carefully, hoping to recreate Christmas magic for a family that had lost so much. By dusk, when preparations were almost complete, the sound of the doorbell surprised everyone. Maxwell answered the door, finding a police officer and a man in a suit. "Mr. Everett, I'm Detective Rodriguez. We need to speak with Savannah Mitchell." Savannah's heart sank when she saw the accusing expression in Max's eyes as he turned to her. "The twins shouldn't see this," was all he said, his voice as cold as the howling wind outside. "Take them upstairs." As she climbed the stairs with the children, Savannah knew her past had finally caught up with her, but not in the way she expected. Someone was deliberately manipulating the facts to incriminate her, and she had strong suspicions about who it might be. 2 hours later, after the detective left, Savannah found Max in his office, a glass of scotch in his hand. "Why didn't you tell me the whole truth?" he asked, not looking at her. "I thought I had." Savannah remained standing by the door. "I told you I was a victim in that scheme. You didn't mention it was a $2 million fraud, or that your name was on every account. Jason used my identity. I signed papers without reading them, trusting him completely." She took a step forward. "Max, I was cleared of all charges. They found no evidence I was involved. No evidence isn't the same as innocence." His eyes finally met hers, hurt evident in them. "I trusted you with my children, Savannah. And have I given you any reason to regret that decision?" The question hung in the air between them. Outside, the blizzard intensified, matching the emotional storm brewing inside the mansion. "No," Max finally admitted. "But trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild." The irony wasn't lost on Savannah. She'd spent weeks helping him trust again, only to face his walls rebuilding even higher. The detective said Lawrence provided the information. She watched his reaction carefully. "Did you ever wonder why your brother-in-law is so interested in discrediting me? Lawrence is protecting this family. Are you sure that's all he's doing?" Max's expression hardened. "Be careful, Savannah. Lawrence was Elaine's brother. He's the only family the twins have besides me. Half-brother," she corrected quietly. "And family doesn't always mean safety. Some of my worst scars came from people who were supposed to protect me." She left him with those words, retreating to her room where she spent the night staring at the ceiling, wondering if the fragile connection they'd built was permanently severed. In the darkness, she made a decision. She wouldn't run this time. Too many times in her life, she'd been forced to start over. This time, she would stay and fight, not just for herself, but for 2 children who'd already lost too much. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the storm having passed in the night. Savannah braced herself for awkwardness, but when she entered the living room, she found Max sitting with the twins, already opening presents. "Vanna," Phoebe exclaimed. "Santa came. Look what he brought me." The normalcy of the scene was disorienting. Max met her gaze over the children's heads, giving her a small nod. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a truce for the children's sake. It was enough for now. The Everett Foundation ballroom sparkled with lights and crystal. Boston's elite circulated among champagne flutes and whispered conversations. The annual charity ball was the most anticipated social event of the year, where millions were raised for children's causes. Maxwell adjusted the bow tie of his impeccable tuxedo, forcing a smile as he greeted important donors. 3 weeks had passed since the Christmas Eve incident, when Savannah was questioned about alleged connections to financial fraud. The investigation hadn't found sufficient evidence for formal charges, but Max's trust had been shaken. "You shouldn't have kept her, Maxwell," Lawrence commented, approaching with a martini glass. "The children are confused. The twins adore her," Max responded dryly. "And technically, She didn't commit any crime. Yet, Lawrence smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. Speaking of the devil, Max followed Lawrence's gaze and felt the air leave his lungs. Savannah had just entered the ballroom, wearing a midnight blue dress that seemed tailor-made for her. Her hair was arranged in an elegant updo, with a few loose strands framing her face. For the first time since meeting her, Max saw her not as his children's nanny, but as a stunning woman who attracted every eye in the room. "Your idea to bring her was interesting," Max commented, trying to maintain his composure. Lawrence smiled again. "I thought it would be appropriate. After all, she works directly with the beneficiaries of the foundation, your children. Besides, I wanted to observe her in a social setting." The truth was that Lawrence was meticulously planning every move. After weeks investigating Savannah's past, he finally had the pieces for his checkmate. Across the ballroom, Savannah felt out of place. Lawrence's invitation had been unexpected, as was his insistence that she wear this specific dress, a gift from the foundation to thank you for your work with the Everett heirs, he had explained. "You look absolutely stunning," Lawrence's voice surprised her. "Come, there are people I want you to meet." Before she could protest, Savannah was led by Lawrence to a group where Max was conversing with some executives. "Gentlemen, this is Savannah Mitchell, the woman who transformed the Everett twins' lives." Lawrence introduced her with exaggerated flourish. "Savannah, this is Senator Campbell and his wife, major supporters of the foundation." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Mitchell," Mrs. Campbell smiled. "We've heard wonderful things about your work with the children." The conversation flowed with surprising ease. Years in the foster system had taught Savannah to adapt to any social environment. Max observed her with growing admiration, noting how she charmed the guests with her intelligence and natural grace. "Dance with me?" Max asked when the orchestra began playing a waltz. The invitation caught her by surprise. Since the Christmas Eve interrogation, Max had kept his distance, limiting their interactions to the strictly necessary. On the dance floor, the touch of Max's hand on her waist sent shivers down her spine. They moved in perfect harmony, as if they had danced together for years. "You look beautiful tonight," Max said, his voice low and close to her ear. "Thank you. I must admit I feel a bit out of place here." "You shouldn't. You fit perfectly." Their gazes met, and for a moment the rest of the world disappeared. The music, the guests, even the past that separated them, everything dissolved in the warmth of that shared look. Lawrence watched the scene with growing irritation. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to unfold. With determination, he walked to the stage and asked for the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please." The music stopped. Max and Savannah separated, turning toward the stage where Lawrence now stood. "Tonight is about transparency and trust, the values that sustain the Everett Foundation," Lawrence began, his perfectly rehearsed smile in place. "That's why I'd like to formally introduce someone who has become part of the Everett family." Max frowned, confused by the direction of the speech. "Savannah Mitchell has been a blessing for the twins, but few know her fascinating history." Lawrence paused dramatically. "Perhaps even my brother-in-law is unaware of certain details." Savannah felt her blood freeze. She knew what would come next. 3 years ago, in the small town of Millfield, Maine, a foundation called New Beginning raised almost $2 million for underprivileged children, money that simply vanished. Lawrence pulled some photographs from his pocket. "The director of that foundation? None other than our dear Ms. Mitchell." Murmurs spread through the ballroom. Max looked at Savannah, seeking a denial, an explanation, anything. "That's not true," Savannah said, her voice firmer than expected. "I was never the director. I was just a volunteer. My ex-fiancée." "Ah, yes, the mysterious ex-fiancée no one can find," Lawrence interrupted. "Convenient, isn't it? Especially when we verified that the bank accounts were in your name, Ms. Mitchell." Max's face transformed into a mask of disappointment and anger. It all made sense now. Her reluctance to discuss her past, her refined social skills, how quickly she had won over his children and himself. "Max," Savannah pleaded, approaching him. "This is manipulation. I can explain." "Enough," Max said, his voice icy. "Not here. Not like this." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of faces and voices for Savannah. She remained at the ball only because leaving would be admitting guilt. When they finally entered the limousine to return to the mansion, the silence was deafening. In the library, Max poured himself a whiskey while waiting for her explanation. Jason created the foundation using my name, Savannah began, her voice shaking. I signed documents without reading them, trusting him completely. When the money disappeared, he disappeared too. I was questioned, but never formally charged. Why didn't you tell me all this? I tried that first night. You said I was just a victim, remember? I thought you knew. What I know, Max said bitterly, is that you concealed the magnitude of the scandal. What else are you hiding, Savannah? The pain in his eyes hit her like a physical blow. Nothing, Max. I came to Boston to start over. Finding you and the children was like finding the family I never had. For a moment, something softened in Max's gaze. But then his phone vibrated, a message from Lawrence with more evidence against her. I think you should go, he finally said. Tomorrow we can discuss the terms of your departure. Max, please. Don't make this harder, Savannah. I have a company and a reputation to protect. And, more importantly, I have 2 vulnerable children. Those words hit her like a knife. Without further arguments, Savannah left the library, silent tears running down her face. Upstairs, she checked on the sleeping twins one last time, her heart breaking at the thought of leaving them. Returning to her room, she began packing her things when she noticed something strange on her dress. A small device was sewn into the hem, a microphone. With growing horror, Savannah realized the extent of Lawrence's trap. The gift dress had been designed to further incriminate her. In that moment, Savannah made a decision. She wouldn't run this time. She wouldn't let another manipulative man destroy her life. Lawrence Sinclair had made a fatal mistake, underestimating her. The small apartment in Somerville was all Savannah could afford with her limited savings. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, and bare walls that seemed to amplify the emptiness she felt. 2 weeks had passed since the charity ball disaster. 2 weeks without seeing the twins, without hearing their laughter, without answering their curious questions. The separation hurt more than any other loss she had experienced. Her phone rang. It was Lucy, the only friend she'd made in Boston, a teacher at the twins' school. They're not doing well, Savannah, Lucy said without preamble. Finn had another tantrum today. Phoebe barely speaks. The new nanny is about to quit. Savannah closed her eyes, feeling the pain of helplessness. Max won't allow me to see them. He's not doing well either. Looks like a ghost wandering the mansion halls, according to the housekeeper. The revelation surprised her. Part of her expected Max to move on, as he always did, burying emotions under layers of work and obligations. I found something about Lawrence. Savannah changed the subject. He was working with Jason. Your ex-fiancé? How is that possible? I found an old photograph. They knew each other from Harvard. Lawrence must have deliberately tracked me down. Savannah took a deep breath. And there's more. I've been analyzing the Everett Technologies financial information Max mentioned during our conversations. Savannah, you shouldn't. There's a pattern of transfers to offshore accounts that started exactly 3 months after Elaine's death. Small amounts, difficult to detect individually, but adding up to millions over the years. The silence on the other end of the line reflected the gravity of the discovery. You need to tell Max, Lucy finally said. He'd never believe me now. At the Everett mansion, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Maxwell had plunged back into work, using long hours at the office to avoid the emptiness of the house that, for a brief period, had become a home again. Sir, the new nanny, Mrs. Peterson, knocked on the door of his home office. I'm sorry, but I can't continue. Max looked up from the documents he was analyzing. What happened now? Finn refuses to eat or sleep. Phoebe constantly cries for Savannah. I've tried all the recommended approaches, but... Fine, Max interrupted, rubbing his temples. You can go. I'll pay for the full month. When he was alone, Max stared at the photograph of the twins on his desk. Beside it, another frame remained face down. A photo of Savannah with the children at the aquarium, taken on that day that seemed to have happened in another life. I should have listened, he muttered to himself, finally admitting the possibility of having made a mistake. The problem was that now, even wanting to believe her, the way Savannah had disappeared only reinforced Lawrence's accusations. His phone rang, showing his brother-in-law's name on the screen. What is it, Lawrence? He answered dryly. Good news, brother. The board unanimously approved the Atlas project. We need to celebrate. Max wasn't in the mood for celebrations, but he agreed to meet Lawrence at the exclusive Beacon Club. He needed to talk to him about the twins and the possibility of hiring a child therapist, as the situation was only getting worse. What Max didn't know was that, on that same cold February night, Savannah had made the decision to return to the Everett mansion, not to beg for her job back, but to collect evidence that could expose Lawrence once and for all. The blizzard that punished Boston that night seemed to reflect Savannah's inner turmoil as she approached the mansion. Knowing the house routine, she was aware that the housekeeper would be off duty and Max probably dining out with investors or meeting with executives. The new nanny, according to Lucy, didn't sleep on the property. Using the back door key she had never returned, Savannah entered silently. The house was quiet and partially dark, exactly as she expected. Her heart raced as she passed the twins' bedroom, resisting the urge to enter and check on them. She couldn't risk waking them. Her mission was different. Max's office was locked, but during her months at the mansion, Savannah had discovered where the spare key was kept. Inside the austere room, she headed directly to the computer. She needed to find the financial records she had mentioned to Lucy, concrete evidence of Lawrence's suspicious transactions. It will be harder to access files without the password, she muttered to herself. It was then that she noticed the leather folder on the desk, marked Everett Foundation Confidential. With trembling hands, Savannah opened the folder and began examining the documents. They were all there: transaction records, bank statements, and most importantly, memos signed by Lawrence authorizing transfers to shell companies. "I knew you'd come back," a cold voice startled her. Lawrence was standing in the doorway, a calculating smile on his face as he swirled a whiskey glass in his hand. Savannah's initial terror quickly transformed into anger. "How did you know?" "Security cameras," he answered casually, entering the office. "I have remote access to all of them. Useful, isn't it?" Savannah backed away, holding the folder firmly against her chest. "Why did you do all this? What do you gain by destroying my reputation?" Lawrence laughed, a humorless sound. "You? This was never about you, darling. It was always about Max and his empire." He approached, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You know what's ironic? I should have been in charge of Everett Technologies. Elaine and I had an agreement. She would invest in my project, and I would be promoted to operations director. But then Max convinced her to redirect the funds to his precious children's foundation." The revelation left Savannah stunned. "So the accident?" Lawrence's smile widened, confirming her greatest fear. "It wasn't an accident at all, was it? You sabotaged the helicopter," Savannah accused, her voice trembling. "Engineering is fascinating, isn't it? A small defect in the fuel system, completely undetectable after a catastrophic accident." He took a sip of his whiskey. "The problem is that Max should have been on that helicopter, not Elaine. A last-minute contingency made him swap places with her." Savannah felt nauseous as she comprehended the magnitude of the evil before her. "You killed your own sister." "Half-sister," Lawrence coldly corrected. "Daughter of Dad's second marriage to that secretary. Sweet Elaine, the favorite, the legitimate heir." His face contorted into a mask of old resentment. "Now, give me those documents." "They won't help you. You're crazy if you think I'll let you continue stealing from the company and manipulating Max," Savannah declared, slowly moving toward the door. Lawrence blocked her path, his demeanor now dangerously calm. "You know, you complicated everything. Max was finally returning to business, focused, controllable. Then you arrived with your sincere smile and dedication to the children, awakening him from that convenient emotional stupor." Lawrence advanced toward Savannah, his polished Italian loafers clicking against the hardwood floor as he cornered her against Max's antique desk. The refined facade he maintained in public had completely dissolved, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "But now, thanks to you," he continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, "I have the perfect opportunity." The obsessive, rejected nanny returns for revenge, finds incriminating documents. Max surprises her. A struggle occurs. His eyes gleamed with malice as he traced the fictional scenario he'd already scripted in his mind. Savannah's blood froze as the full realization of Lawrence's plan crystallized. "He would never believe that," she countered, though uncertainty flickered across her face. "No." Lawrence's smile widened. "With your history of fraud? With your sudden disappearance? And who said Max will be alive to question anything? He reached inside his suit jacket, and Savannah caught the glint of metal. The attack came with surprising speed for a man who spent his days behind mahogany desks, but Savannah was prepared. Years in the foster system and abusive homes had taught her to read danger signs, to anticipate violence before it erupted. She managed to dodge his lunge, throwing the documents into the air like confetti to create momentary confusion as she darted toward the door. Scattered papers floated through the air between them as Lawrence recovered, his face contorting with rage at her defiance. The elegant financial reports that documented his years of embezzlement now drifted to the floor around them, damning evidence transforming into a chaotic blizzard of white. Lawrence caught her in the hallway, his manicured fingers grabbing her arm with a brutality that would leave bruises. "You little nobody," he hissed, his patrician accent slipping as his control frayed. "Do you really think you can destroy what I've built?" The struggle that followed was desperate, Savannah fighting not only for her life, but to prevent another heinous crime from being committed. She clawed, kicked, and twisted, refusing to become another victim in Lawrence's path to wealth and power. The sudden sound of the front door opening froze them both. The heavy thud of the mansion's oak door against its frame echoed through the marble entrance hall below. "Savannah?" Max's voice called out, confusion evident in his tone. Lawrence reacted with the quick calculation of a man accustomed to adapting his schemes. He yanked Savannah against him, one arm crushing her ribs while his other hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her warning cry. "Up here, Max. Quick!" he shouted, his voice transformed into the concerned brother-in-law. "I caught an intruder." Heavy footsteps rushed up the grand staircase. When Max appeared at the landing, slightly out of breath from his hurried ascent, the scene before him appeared damning. Lawrence restraining a struggling Savannah, financial documents scattered across the hallway floor like fallen leaves. "Lawrence, let her go," Max commanded, his voice carrying a strange calmness that seemed incongruous with the chaotic scene. "She broke into your office," Lawrence explained, maintaining his grip on Savannah. His voice shifted into the reasonable tone he used in board meetings when presenting unpleasant facts. "She was stealing foundation documents. I caught her red-handed, Max." Max approached slowly, his movements deliberate, his eyes never leaving Savannah's. Something in his steady gaze communicated more than words could convey. "I said let her go." Now, something in Max's voice, perhaps the steel beneath the calm, made Lawrence hesitate. His grip loosened fractionally, enough for Savannah to wrench herself free. She stumbled forward, catching herself against the wall, gasping for breath. "Max, he killed Elaine," she blurted immediately, words tumbling out before Lawrence could silence her again. "It was sabotage, not an accident. He just confessed everything to me." Lawrence's response was a theatrical laugh, perfectly pitched to suggest concern rather than guilt. He played the role of a reasonable man confronted with absurd accusations. "See?" He gestured toward Savannah with a dismissive wave. "Completely unhinged. Breaking into your home, making wild accusations. She needs professional help, Max." Max said nothing. Instead, he bent down, methodically collecting some of the scattered documents from the floor. His face remained impossibly composed as he scanned the contents, flipping through pages of financial records, his expression revealing nothing. "Fascinating," he finally said, his voice level but with an undercurrent of something dangerous. "These memos have your signature, Lawrence, authorizing transfers to companies that don't exist." He held up a page, pointing to his signature line. "Your digital signature, with timestamps and verification codes." Lawrence's practiced smile faltered for the first time. A flicker of genuine fear crossed his features before he reassembled his mask of innocence. "Max, don't be ridiculous. Those documents are obviously forged. She's trying to turn us against each other. That's what she does, creates division, exploits weakness." "The digital signature has the IP registration from your apartment," Max continued as if Lawrence hadn't spoken, his voice taking on the methodical tone he used when dissecting failing business ventures. "And the dates, all beginning exactly 3 months after Elaine's death. Strange timing, isn't it? Almost as if someone was waiting for the initial shock and grief to settle before beginning their scheme." Lawrence visibly paled, his tan from recent Aspen ski trips unable to mask the blood draining from his face. "I can explain everything," he insisted, his voice losing its smooth confidence. It's all a misunderstanding, a simple accounting irregularity that I've been investigating myself. Then explain. Max stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Why you said it should have been me on the helicopter, not Elaine. Genuine panic flashed across Lawrence's face, his eyes widening in momentary confusion before narrowing with calculation. You were listening? His hand moved subtly toward his jacket pocket again. At that precise moment, Max's cell phone emitted a soft beep. He removed it from his pocket with deliberate slowness, turning the screen to show Lawrence. A recording app was active, its timer counting seconds, a red indicator light showing it was transmitting data. When I received the security alert on my phone and saw you confronting Savannah on the video feed, I called the police, Max explained, his voice dangerously controlled. I started recording the moment I entered the house. Everything you've said in the last 5 minutes has been transmitted directly to Detective Rodriguez. They're already on their way. The transformation on Lawrence's face was terrifying to witness. A complete metamorphosis from cultivated aristocrat to cornered animal in seconds. With a primal cry that seemed to emerge from some atavistic depth, he lunged at Max with unexpected force, sending both men crashing against the ornate stair railing. The century-old wooden balustrade, designed more for aesthetic beauty than to withstand violent struggles, partially splintered under their combined weight. The crack of breaking would punctuated their grunts as they teetered precariously over the marble floor 20 feet below. If I fall, you fall with me, Lawrence growled, abandoning all pretense of civilization. His hands found Max's throat, tightening with the desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. It should have been you from the beginning. Savannah scanned the hallway frantically, looking for something, anything to use. Her eyes landed on a heavy silver candlestick on the console table, an anniversary gift to Elaine and Max, according to the engraving on its base. Fitting, she thought fleetingly, that Elaine might help save her husband even now. She grabbed the weighty silver piece and, summoning strength born of desperation, swung it with all her might. The impact against Lawrence's shoulder made a sickening sound, metal meeting bone with unforgiving force. The blow made him release Max with a howl of pain and stagger backward, momentarily disoriented. His designer shoes, with their smooth leather soles, found no purchase on the polished floor. Lawrence's arms windmilled frantically as he lost his balance against the compromised railing. For one suspended moment, he seemed to hang in space, his eyes meeting Savannah's with pure hatred. Then he was falling, his scream echoing through the mansion's cavernous entrance hall. The dull, heavy thud that followed seemed to vibrate through the entire house, succeeded by a disturbing silence broken only by Max and Savannah's ragged breathing. Trembling violently, Savannah approached Max, who was on his knees, one hand braced against the remaining section of railing as he massaged his throat with the other. Angry red marks were already forming where Lawrence's fingers had dug into his skin. The twins, he managed to say between painful breaths, the two words conveying an entire universe of concern. Together, they rushed to the children's room, moving as quickly and quietly as possible down the hallway. Max's hand found Savannah's, gripping it with surprising strength. They paused at the twins' bedroom door, both preparing themselves for what they might find. Had the commotion woken the children? Had they heard the violence, the scream, the sickening thud? Max pushed the door open slowly, the hinges protesting with a slight creak. Inside, illuminated only by Phoebe's unicorn night light, they found both children miraculously asleep. Finn was sprawled across his rocket ship bed, one arm dangling over the edge, while Phoebe clutched her stuffed elephant, her dark curls spread across the pillow in a halo reminiscent of her mother. They had slept through it all, innocent and oblivious to the horror that had unfolded just feet away from their sanctuary. The relief that washed over both adults was almost physical in its intensity. When the police sirens finally pierced the night air, their blue and red lights painting kaleidoscope patterns on the snow-covered front lawn, Max and Savannah remained in the doorway of the twins' room. His hand still held hers, their fingers intertwined so tightly it was difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. "I'm not letting you go this time," he promised, his voice ragged but resolute. The words held a weight beyond the immediate crisis, a declaration of trust finally restored, of walls finally breached. The aftermath unfolded in organized chaos. Paramedics tended to Lawrence, who had survived his fall but with significant injuries. Police officers filled the mansion's grand rooms, their practical uniforms and utility belts incongruous against the refined luxury of antique furniture and oil paintings. Statements were taken, evidence collected. The twins moved temporarily to a guest house on the property with a trusted family friend. In the days and weeks that followed, the full scope of Lawrence's crimes emerged like a dark iceberg, slowly revealing its true mass. Financial forensic experts uncovered years of systematic embezzlement. Engineers confirmed tampering with the helicopter's fuel system. Former Harvard classmates came forward, connecting Lawrence to Jason, Savannah's ex-fiancé, in a scheme that stretched back further than anyone had imagined. One evening, a month after that fateful night, Max found Savannah in the library. She stood before Elaine's portrait, which now hung on the side wall rather than in its former place of prominence above the fireplace. "I had it moved," Max said quietly, joining her. "It's still important, but it doesn't need to be the center of everything anymore." Savannah nodded, understanding the profound shift this simple rearrangement represented. "The twins asked me today if I'm staying," she said, her voice carrying the question she herself needed answered. "Are you?" His question carried the weight of everything still unspoken between them. Fear, hope, possibility. "Do you want me to?" She turned to face him fully, no longer willing to hide behind oblique conversations. Max took her hand in his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "When I got that security alert on my phone that night, seeing Lawrence confronting you." His voice faltered. "I've never been so terrified, not even when I learned about Elaine's crash." He paused, struggling to articulate emotions long suppressed beneath layers of grief and duty. "I realized then that I couldn't lose you. Not because of what you do for the children, though God knows that's miraculous enough, but because of what you've come to mean to me." "Max, let me finish, please." He took a deep breath, the kind that precedes a dive into deep water. "I made a terrible mistake doubting you, letting Lawrence manipulate me. I was so afraid of being vulnerable again, of experiencing that kind of loss, that I sabotaged the one thing that was healing all of us." Savannah felt tears gather in her eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition. "We both have trust issues for good reasons," she acknowledged, a simple statement that encompassed lifetimes of pain. "Then maybe we can work on them together." Max's hand gently rose to her cheek, his touch feather-light, as if she might disappear at any moment. "The children need you. And I need you too." In the dim light of the library, surrounded by leather-bound volumes containing centuries of human stories, some tragic, some triumphant, Max and Savannah's lips met in a kiss that carried the promise of a new beginning. It was tentative at first, healing rather than passionate, hopeful rather than desperate. Outside the leaded glass windows, spring was finally arriving in Boston. The first crocuses pushed defiantly through the last patches of winter snow, their purple and gold blossoms harbingers of renewal. Inside the Everett mansion, a different kind of rebirth was taking place, one built not on forgetting the past, but on finding the courage to embrace a future neither of them had dared to imagine possible in their most guarded hearts. Spring in Boston transformed the Everett mansion's gardens. Tulips erupted in vibrant displays, symbolizing the renewal happening within those historic walls. 3 months had passed since Lawrence's schemes were exposed. He survived the fall but remained confined to a wheelchair, a temporary prison before the permanent one awaiting him. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The recorded confession, financial documents, and testimony confirming his connection to Jason. On the veranda, Savannah watched the twins playing in the garden. Finn built elaborate forts while Phoebe drew, both exhibiting the carefree nature that had disappeared during her absence. "They're different," commented Max, approaching with tea. "More secure. The therapist says they're processing the trauma surprisingly well. Children are incredibly resilient when they have love and stability. Like you," Max observed. Anyone else would have run after what happened. It was true. Savannah could have moved on, distancing herself from the pain associated with the Everett family. Instead, she stayed, not as a nanny, but as a consultant at the restructured Everett Foundation, developing programs for foster children. "Running never solved anything for me," she replied. Besides, I couldn't leave them again. Their relationship had transformed into something indefinable. Not employer and employee, not exactly friends, not officially a couple. There was mutual respect, rebuilt trust, and that undeniable attraction both still hesitated to fully acknowledge. The Arts Center opens next month, Max mentioned. The Elaine Everett Art Center had been conceived as a legacy for his late wife, offering free classes in music, dance, and visual arts to underprivileged children. The director they hired is excellent. I can't wait to see the finished space. Actually, there's been a change of plans. The director accepted a position in Chicago. Max set his cup down and turned to face her. Savannah, you would be the ideal person to direct the center. The surprise left her momentarily speechless. Max, I don't have administrative experience for a project of this scale. You have passion, vision, and understanding of what these children need. The Foundation's board was impressed with your proposals. What about the twins? They just got me back in their lives. I think we can find a solution for that too. Before she could question his meaning, Phoebe came running to them, holding a colorful drawing of 4 figures holding hands. 2 small ones in the center, 1 tall figure in a suit, and another with long brown hair. It's our family, Phoebe explained, her eyes shining. Savannah felt her throat tighten. She looked at Max, who watched with an expression mixing hope and vulnerability. That evening, after the children were in bed, Max invited Savannah to the library, where everything had begun. I know it's still complicated, he began, sitting beside her on the sofa. We're still healing, still processing everything. But I want you to know I can't imagine this house, this life, without you anymore. He took her hand. When you're ready, I'll be here. We want you to be part of our family, in whatever way feels comfortable for you. Tears welled in Savannah's eyes. Her life had been marked by impermanence. The idea of belonging was almost overwhelming. I need to know, she said. Elaine, you still love her. Max sighed. I always will. She was part of me, mother of my children. But the human heart has an incredible capacity for expansion. Loving again doesn't diminish what I felt for her. He touched her face. What I feel for you is different, but equally powerful. You brought light back when I thought we would permanently live in shadows. He leaned forward. Their kiss was gentle, hesitant, a question more than a statement. When Savannah responded, it felt like something finally clicking into place. It won't be easy, she whispered. The best stories never are. The next weeks unfolded in a new rhythm. Savannah moved to the guest suite in the East Wing, a symbolic shift in her position. Together with Max, she hired Mrs. Bennett, a grandmother with childcare experience whose warmth resonated with the twins. The Arts Center took shape in a converted factory. Savannah spent mornings overseeing renovations, developing programs that might have changed her own trajectory had they existed when she was young. 2 days before the center's opening, a letter arrived from the Maine State Prosecutor's office. Max, Savannah called, her voice unsteady. Jason's been arrested in Mexico. He's confessed everything. All charges against me have been dropped. Max read the document, his expression brightening. This closes that chapter completely. She nodded, tears filling her eyes as years of suspicion finally lifted. I never thought this day would come. That night, Savannah slept peacefully for the first time in years. In the morning, she woke with clarity and purpose that felt like rebirth. On opening day, Savannah stood beside Max on stage. The twins sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride. Behind them, donors, community leaders, and future students filled every seat. Max stepped to the microphone, momentarily overwhelmed. Then his eyes found Savannah's, drawing strength from her presence. Welcome, he began, his voice clear and strong, to the beginning of a dream that belongs to all of us. The crowd gathered in the Elaine Everett Arts Center's main hall applauded as Maxwell concluded his opening speech. The building, once an abandoned textile factory in Boston's South End, had been transformed into a vibrant space with music rooms, dance studios, and art workshops spread across 3 floors. In the 6 months since the initial proposal, Savannah had immersed herself in the project, working alongside architects, educators, and artists to create a space that not only honored Elaine's memory, but genuinely served community needs. And now, Max continued, his gaze finding Savannah in the front row, I'm pleased to introduce the center's executive director, the visionary who brought this dream to life beyond what I could have imagined. Ladies and gentlemen, Savannah Mitchell. The applause increased as Savannah took the stage, elegant in a sapphire blue dress. Her initial nervousness dissolved when she saw the smiling faces in the audience, especially Phoebe and Finn, who waved excitedly from the front row. "Thank you," she began, adjusting the microphone. "A year ago, I was a woman trying to start over, carrying a painful past and little hope for the future. If someone had told me then that I'd be here today, inaugurating a center that will transform lives of children like I once was, I never would have believed it." She paused, looking at Max, who watched her with evident admiration. "This place exists thanks to Maxwell Everett's vision and Elaine's legacy, whose love for arts and children inspired every decision we made in creating this space. We're not just building an arts center. We're building a refuge, a community where children who may never have experienced stability can find their voice and potential." As Savannah detailed the programs and partnerships, Max couldn't take his eyes off her. The transformation that had occurred in recent months was remarkable, not just in the mansion, which had become a home filled with life again, but in all of them. The twins were flourishing, with Finn showing surprising talent for piano and Phoebe revealing herself as a promising young artist. Max had rediscovered balance between his executive role and being a father, delegating more responsibilities at the company to be present in his children's lives. And Savannah, she had become the beating heart that united everything and everyone. The opening ceremony continued with performances by local young artists and tours of the facilities. By late afternoon, when only a small group remained, close friends, foundation board members, and the center's core staff, Max invited everyone for a special toast in the main hall. "Today we celebrate not just this wonderful center's opening," he began, raising his glass, "but a journey of healing and rediscovery." His eyes found Savannah's across the room, where she chatted with a dance instructor. With a discreet gesture, he called her to his side. "Just over a year ago, a courageous young woman entered our lives and transformed our world in ways I never imagined possible," Max continued, taking Savannah's hand in his. "She taught us that family isn't defined by blood, but by love. That trust, once broken, can be rebuilt even stronger. And that sometimes we find our destiny precisely when we stop looking." A surprised murmur spread through the small crowd when Max knelt, still holding Savannah's hand. "Savannah Mitchell," he said, his voice steady despite the evident emotion in his eyes. "You entered our home as a nanny, but won our hearts as much more. You taught me to love again when I thought that part of me had died forever. You gave my children the mother they deserved." He paused, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Would you do us the honor of officially becoming part of our family? Will you marry me?" The ring was a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, not a traditional solitaire, but something unique and perfectly suited for a woman who defied all conventions. Tears glistened in Savannah's eyes as she looked from Max to the twins, who now approached anxiously, holding something in their hands. "We made something for you too," Phoebe solemnly declared, handing Savannah a small framed drawing, the same one she had made months ago, showing the four of them together as a family. "Please say yes," Finn pleaded, his eyes identical to his father's full of hope. "We've already practiced the music for the wedding and everything." A laugh escaped through Savannah's tears. This moment, this wonderful imperfect family she had found through so much pain and loss, it was more than she had ever dared to dream. "Yes," she answered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes to all of you." 1 year later, in an intimate ceremony in the Everett Mansion Gardens, Savannah and Maxwell exchanged vows under an arch covered with white and blue flowers. Phoebe, as flower girl, scattered petals along the path, while Finn carried the rings with all the solemnity a 7-year-old could muster. After the ceremony, the small family reception included a surprise guest, the doctor from Boston Hospital, confirming the news that Savannah and Max had shared with the twins the previous night. The Everett family would grow in a few months. As the celebration concluded, the family climbed together to the lookout in the New Hampshire hills. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, creating a breathtaking backdrop. Max took out 4 biodegradable balloons from a box, giving one to each of them. On the balloons, they had written messages to Elaine, words of love, gratitude, and farewell. She would be so proud of the family we've built, Max said softly, a hand resting on Savannah's slightly rounded belly. Of all of us. Together, the four released the balloons, watching them rise and dance in the wind, carrying their messages skyward. As the new Everett family remained embraced, watching the balloons until they became mere distant dots on the horizon, there was a sense of peace and completeness. It wasn't a perfect ending. Life rarely offers such conclusions. It was something better, a new chapter in a story of redemption, healing, and love that none of them could have predicted, but all had helped write together.